Hello and welcome. My name is Retro, and today I will be here finally talking about survivability and the basic survivability strategies that you can use in this game that can really apply to any Warframe. Obviously, specific Warframes may have survivability strategies that are unique to them. For example, Revenant's Mesmer Skin. But we'll just be talking about mainly the three basic survivability strategies that you can use on any Warframe for Still Path late game content. This video is long overdue. I made a video months ago talking about the nuances between the three, or I guess four different health types, them being health, shields, armor, and overguard. And that was meant to be a precursor to this video. So I am expecting you to know exactly how those four things work and the way damage reduction works with them and stuff like that. They are very basic, so unless you're new to the game, you should already know how these work, so it's not like any secret mystery behind them. But yes, this video is not going to cover any like core fundamental basics, because while that video was meant for people that literally just started the game, this video is meant for people that are going into Still Path and finding it difficult to survive and don't really know how to do it, or Still Path or all the late game content like maybe Archon Hunts, Necrocell, stuff like that. Because realistically, this game is very easy to survive in. Enemies, if you're playing the game right, enemies just don't really touch you, honestly. And so you shouldn't have to worry too much about dying. It's very easy to make a good setup, even with the squishiest Warframes in the game. For the sake of that, I will be using Loki Prime as the example for all the survivability strategies I will be using in this video. I picked Loki Prime because he only has 280 health and shields, which is extremely low. And he also only has 135 armor, which isn't the lowest of any Warframe, but is also pretty low. So yes, we are going to talk about him because he is a very squishy Warframe. Obviously, Loki doesn't really have to worry about survivability because he can go invisible, and invisibility is broken in this game. It is the best survivability in the game. But let's assume he doesn't have that ability and that he needs to survive. Let's talk about it. So there are three basic core fundamental survivability strategies that any Warframe, for the most part, can make use of, them being health tanking, shield tanking, and shield gating. Obviously, the three Warframes that don't have shields, being Inaros, Kulavo, and Nidus, can't shield tank or shield gate because they don't have shields. But besides them, every other Warframe can do these to at least some effect. Some Warframes will do these to better effects than others. Warframes that have native damage reduction abilities will obviously be able to do the tanking setups that not Warframes. But if you're talking about basic Still Path content or even other late game content at its base level, any Warframe, even without any native damage reduction ability and even low health or shields and armor, can health tank and they can shield tank. They will struggle to scale that into higher levels, and even enemies with more native damage reduction abilities will still struggle to scale that into even more higher levels, as tanking setups in general just aren't as good when you're talking about endurance runs. But for base content, for base Still Path content, which is what this video is focusing on, any Warframe can do this stuff. Again, unless you're one of the Warframes that don't have shields. So, how do you health tank? What's the point about health tanking? Well, obviously, the point about health tanking is simply just increasing your EHP, which stands for effective health points, as much as possible. If you don't know what effective health points are, it is essentially the actual amount of damage you can take. So it factors in your health, your shield, and your damage reduction, and what your EHP is the amount of damage you can actually take from enemies before you die. So you want to make your EHP as large as possible when it comes to health tanking setups. With health, with damage reduction, with armor, if you wanted to go that route, you would want that for higher scaling content. And also you want some form of healing, which can be a number of different things. There are many different ways you can get healing in this game, but I'll talk about them after we go over the basic health tank setup, right? Health tanking is actually super easy. It is, I feel like, gotten a lot easier in the last year and a half or so than some of the other setups. Because realistically, all you need for a health tank setup these days, for a basic health tank setup for base Still Path content, is this mod right here, this Arcane right here, Arcane Blessing, and this mod right here, Adaptation. And this will do you quite good. Now, if you don't believe me, if you don't know what these two things do, Arcane Blessing will give you up to, at max rank, 1,200 additional health on top of your base health. So for Loki with base 280, I would get 1,480 health. And Adaptation gives me 90% damage reduction to a specific damage type. And you can get the damage reduction built up to multiple damage types. It depends on what damage types enemies are using. So yeah, this actually gives you quite a good amount of EHP, and I'll obviously you'd need to pair this with some form of healing because you need a way to heal yourself. But with just Arcane Blessing, Adaptation, Loki's native damage reduction from his base armor, as well as shields and the native damage reduction shields get, Loki with this setup, with just these one Arcane and one mod, Loki's EHP is sitting around 27,000. Which is pretty good. That is a good EHP, especially for base Steel Path. And this is a very low health, base survivability stats Warframe, right? So if you put this on a Warframe with more of these base stats, like say Corvix, he has a lot more health, obviously. He has a lot more armor at base. You're going to be seeing a bigger increase in his base survivability, right? If you really wanted to make health tanking scale better, you might also want to consider putting on Vitality for some extra health, and also armor. I would not recommend using Steel Fiber because you're not going to get a lot of armor out of it. Even on Corvex, which is the highest armored Warframe in the game, you're only getting, 700 armor does he have, or does it be 800? Let's say 800. I think it's 750, but let's say it's 800 armor he has. You'll only get 800 armor out of Steel Fiber, while Health Conversion will be giving you 1,350 armor. So you're getting more armor out of Health Conversion. So with Health Conversion, Adaptation, Vitality, Arcane Blessing, his native, his base shields, and native 50% damage reduction from shields, his EHP is 103,000. So you can get a lot of EHP, obviously, from simply just using basic stuff like this. But the benefit of health tank setups and the main positive health tank setups is they don't actually need a lot in terms of modding. Like, you can do Arcane Blessing and Adaptation. So I wouldn't recommend normally running Vitality and Health Conversion, even though it will significantly increase your EHP. The reason why is because you want to be able to basically get away with putting as little amount of mods into survivability as possible when modding a Warframe, because the least amount of mods and arcanes you put into survivability means the more mods you can put into your actual abilities, which is ideal, right? To make a Warframe work, you need survivability mods, you need energy economy mods, and then you want to have as much mods left over for your abilities, because they're kind of the ones that you could get rid of. Because if you don't have energy economy, if you don't have survivability, the build's not going to function regardless, even if you do have a very powerful ability setup, right? So you want to put as least amount of mods as possible to your survivability. And this setup with just Blessing and Adaptation will be more than enough survivability you need for base Steel Path. Again, if you did want to scale it into higher missions, then yeah, you probably want Vitality and Health Conversion. But at the same time, going into higher missions is when you probably want to consider doing a different survivability tactic anyway, because health tanking is just going to be outclassed by all the survivability tactics anyway. So what are the benefits and disadvantages of health tanking? Well, the advantage is already something I've mentioned already. Health tanking is extremely easy to get going. You really just need Adaptation and Arcane Blessing. The advantages of health tanking also over, let's say, shield tanking is actually Arcane Blessing. Because even on a Warframe with incredibly low health, which, for example, Loki with only 280 health, which is very low, I can still get to 1,480 health, which is very high, with just Arcane Blessing. I don't even need a mod for Vitality. Where if I use Primed Redirection on Loki, which is what we're about to do, actually, you'll see that I'm going to get a lot less return out of it. So typically on a Warframe like Loki that has very little shields, shield tanking becomes less viable. On a different Warframe, more so. But yes, it works on pretty much every Warframe, including Warframes that don't have shields, that shield tanking and shield getting just can't work on at all. And also, for base Steel Path content, doesn't require a lot of mods. If you want to make it scale up more, then it starts to require more and more mods, and it becomes less effective. The downsides of it is health doesn't have any native healing, so you have to outsource your healing from other measures, and also health doesn't have a gating mechanic, unlike shields. You can get gating mechanics from Warframe abilities or Mighty Symbiosis, which is a mod that any Vulpifiler can use, so you can get that pretty easily. So you can outsource health gating, which I would recommend to do if you were health tanking, but it doesn't have it natively. As for healing comes in all forms and sizes. Many Warframes have abilities that heal them. You have Arcane Grace, Arcane Reaper, you have Molt Reconstruct, Magnus Repair, Magnus Elevate, Gloom, you have a ton, right? Gloom's a Helminth ability. There are Healing Return, Healing Strike. There are tons, a Life Strike, not Healing Strike. There are tons and tons and tons of ways to get healing. If the Warframe doesn't already have native healing, so that is pretty easy to maintain. The benefit of shield shields is that you don't have to worry about that as there is native shield regen. But yeah, that is a downside to it, but it is not a giant downside or anything. So moving on from health tanking and on to shield tanking. So shield tanking, if you haven't figured out yet, works effectively the same as health tanking, except instead of trying to build up your shields, your health to get as much EHP as possible, you want to build up your shields to get as much EHP as possible. So what are the kind of setup you want to be using on a shield tank setup? Well, ideally you would have primed redirection. Normal redirection will work, obviously, but primed redirection would be ideal. You would obviously also have adaptation again, and another one you'd probably want adaptation again, fast deflection, and also ideally you would have arcane aegis. So let's talk about this. The benefits of shield tanking over health tanking, and obviously the disadvantages that you can probably already figure out already. So first let's talk about the EHP. So on a Warframe like Loki that has natively pretty low armor, well, less than 300 armor, shields get more native damage reduction than health. So any Warframe that has less than 300 armor, by default, their shields have more damage reduction than health, because shields have 50% damage reduction natively, and health has no damage reduction natively. It gets it from armor, and 300 armor works out to be 50% damage reduction. So on this setup, we would have an EHP factoring in adaptation, native shield damage reduction, his shield's value, and also his health, and the native damage reduction he gets from his armor. You're getting around 14,000 EHP, which is still quite a lot, right? So it's not as much as what we were talking about with health tanking on Loki specifically because of his very low shield value. But if you were doing it on a Warframe that has, let's say, even 400 shields, which isn't that common, primed redirection will get you closer to the 1,000 mark, and you'll be getting more comparable EHP values from both health tanking and shield tanking. It's just on Loki specifically, health tanking has an advantage because Arcane Blessing is so good and doesn't matter what your base health is, where primed redirection does. But there are multiple advantages that shield tanking has above health tanking, even if it does have a less EHP. Number one is native shield recovery. So you don't have to worry about shield regeneration from anything else. This is where things like fast deflection and arcane aegis come in. Fast deflection obviously increases your shield recharge rate and also lowers the shield delay rate, making your shields recharge faster. So you get passive healing that you don't have to worry about it, making it a bit more of a passive playstyle. And you also have arcane aegis, which will actually give you shield recharge even when you're taking damage if it's triggered, which is a pretty big boon to your survivability. The other benefit that shields have are sentinel mods. You have Shield Charger, which will further increase your shield recovery and also increase your max shields, which further gives you additional EHP. And also you have Guardian, which off cooldown will completely restore your shields when they break. And if you want to take an extra step further, you can use the specific precept mod from the Taxon, which restores your shields when it attacks enemies, which gives you a lot of shield regeneration. So you actually get a lot of passive shield regeneration from things like Arcane Aegis, Fast Deflection, and the Taxon especially, but also just from Shield Charger or Guardian on any other Sentinel, which can offer you a lot of survivability even if your EHP is lower because you're just pumping out more regen than what you might be getting with health, especially because you don't have to worry about helmeting on another Warframe ability, a specific ability to give you health, giving up a mod slot on your melee weapon for things like healing return, giving an arcane slot, modding around using your operator in a specific way, stuff like that. You just get it natively and for free. The other benefit, obviously, with shield tanking is shield gate. When your shields break, you get that period of invulnerability, you no longer take any damage, and the more shields you have, the longer that period is as well. So with shield tank setups, obviously you want to increase your shields as high as possible, and if on a good Warframe with a higher base shield value, you could be getting the full 2.5 seconds of invulnerability from your shield gate, which gives you time to build up your shields again, you can get them recharging again, and it gives you that safety net. When your health gets lower to 0, you're dead. When your shield gets lower to 0, you have that safety net, which offers a extra bit of flexibility and a bit more comfort in your playing because you have that extra bar. If you start taking damage to your health, you're probably going to die immediately without your shields because your health will be so low. But ideally, that won't happen because you should be able to maintain your shields well enough that this isn't an issue. On the other hand, however, if you're playing a Warframe that uses any ability that can give them shield regeneration or overshields, especially overshields, and also any Warframe that, or any Warframe that's using Condemn or Pillage, which are helmet abilities, you can get rid of Aegis, you can get a Fast Deflection, and you could even get rid of Primed Redirection, actually, because suddenly I have my overshields available to me, and overshields give me 1,200 extra shields. So I don't actually have 28 shields, I have 1,480. Though it's probably still a good idea to use primed redirection, because not only does it increase your total shield value, but it will also increase your shield gate value, because overshield doesn't do that. So if you have the mod slots on, you might still want to recommend using primed redirection anyway. But with this example, if I am using, say, pillage, that's going to give me my max overshields. With just these two mods, with primed redirection, my EHP ends up being 38,000, which is pretty good. Obviously, without primed redirection, it would be a bit lower. And the good thing about things like Pillage or any other ability, which there are tons of, that will instantly restore your shields like that, is you don't need to worry about things like Fast Affection or Arcane Aegis, because they're there to increase the rate of your shield's regeneration. But with these mods, you can just cast the ability and you get your shields back immediately, which gives you a lot of survivability, and it definitely makes shield gating... Well, it gets rid of shield tanking's fundamental flaw, which is it requires a lot more investment than health tanking does, because by using just one of these abilities, you get rid of the need of one of the mods, one of the arcanes, or even two of the mods, meaning you go from a setup that used to need 3 mods and 1 arcane to just 1 mod, and that's it. That's all your survivability plus the helmet. So that gives you a lot of extra capabilities when it comes to shield tanking, and extra buffs related to shield tanking as well. So yes, but yeah, the fundamental flaws really with shield tanking is that if you aren't in a situation where you're using an ability like that, it requires a lot more investment when it comes to actual mods and arcanes. And like I said, you want to have as little investment onto mods and arcanes as you possibly can, because it means having more mod slots for your abilities. And some Warframes like Loki are probably just not going to shield tank that well because they have very low shields. On a Warframe like Frost, I mean, he has Overguard, so this doesn't really apply. But let's say Frost didn't have Overguard. Yeah, I would definitely shield tank over health tanking because he has a very high base shield value, especially his Prime version. So I'm going to get a lot of shields out of Prime Redirection. But on a Warframe like Loki or Daggeth, as another example, she has a pretty decent amount of health actually, but a very low amount of shields. You probably don't want to mod for a shield tank setup because you're not going to get as much return out of it as you will, say, Arcane Blessing when it comes to health, right? Pretty simple. Okay, shield gating. So, shield gating as a mechanic is when your shields break, you get a period of vulnerability. What is shield gating as a survivability tactic? Well, it's pretty simple actually. Basically, you want to have as little amounts of shields as possible, so you can use things like Brief Respite and the Augur mod set, which if you don't know, give you shield recovery on energy cast based on how much energy you use. So one ability cast with less shields will fully restore your shields and basically make you invincible. Because every time your shields break, you just cast an ability, your shields fully restore, and then you can't die because shield gating makes you your health invulnerable to any damage because it negates any excess damage that would normally go to your health. The only downside to this is obviously Toxic that bypasses shields. So what would we need for a shield gate setup? Well, that's pretty simple. You'll need something like Catalyzing Shields to not only reduce your shield value to make it easier to get your shields restored immediately in one ability cast, but it will also make your shield gate duration 1.33 seconds. So on a Warframe like Loki, this is actually a buff because Loki's base shield gate duration is lower than that. But it means we can get away with lowering our shields while still managing a decently length shield gate duration, which gives us that extra comfort zone so we can not play with low shields, because 56 shields, which is what we have with Catalyzing Shield, would be like 0.5 or something, 0.4 seconds normally. So obviously Catalyzing Shield is going to make it much better for us, so we get a bit more rest time in between needing to cast our abilities to maintain our survivability. And the other thing we're going to want with shield gate setups is also Rolling Guard. This is because status effects, which don't necessarily matter too much for tanking setups, will completely wreck any shield gate setup. So Rolling Guard not only gives you that longer period of, not only gives you 3 seconds of iframes if you have it at max rank, which can give you some more breathing room whenever you take a lot of damage, but it also will cleanse you of any negative status effects, which is very crucial for maintaining your survivability when it comes to a shield gate setup. You could theoretically get away with without needing Catalyzing Shields or get away with not using Rolling Guard, but the setup wouldn't be nearly as well. So what is the benefit of shield gating over the other two? Well, it only uses 2 mods and leaves both your arcane slots free, which none of the other 2 setups use unless you're using an ability like Pillage with shield tanking. So it has a relatively low requirement compared to shield tanking, but has around about the same requirement as shield gating. Additionally, it is also just the best survivability tactic in the game, because issues can happen where you issues can, obviously, if your tanking fails when it comes to health tanking, you're dead. If your tanking fails when it comes to shield tanking, you do have that safety net of your shield gate, but if you can't restore your shields up in time, your shield gate is going to be pretty low, like the duration of it, because of how shield gate duration works when you go from fully depleted, which will mean enemies will have more time to then start to actually hit you and potentially kill you. Shield gating has neither of those issues. You can get your shield back immediately, you get the max shield gate duration, and it essentially literally makes you invincible as long as you pay attention to what's going on around you and you're not being hit by toxic. So it is the best survivability tactic in the game, and it is 100% the one you want to use if you were doing endurance, except for specific circumstances. This is because even with the most EHP possible, you're still going to run into issues of getting one shot, because enemy damage scaling is ridiculous. When you get into high level content, enemies just do a lot of damage, and you can have EHP into 50,000s, 100,000, whatever, and you could still get one shot because of how much damage enemies do. Shield gating obviously doesn't have to worry about that because of how shield gating works. So shield gating is going to be the survivability tactic that is going to scale the best. What's the fundamental flaw with shield gating? Well, shield gating requires a lot more activity on your end. You need to be actively aware of when your shields break. You need to make sure you're watching for the static effect the screen does when your shields do break. You need to immediately cast your abilities when that happens. You need to pay attention to when you're afflicted with status effects to roll for rolling guard. You need to be aware of what's going on. While shield tanking and shield health tanking are much more passive gameplays. This is why, if I can help it, I generally make health tank or shield tank builds. I tend to avoid shield gating builds because I don't generally enjoy endurance that much, because I just don't like sitting around in the same mission for a long period of time. I kind of get bored, and I mostly just enjoy like build testing and making different builds. So I'm not doing endurance very often, so I can get away with making a more passive playstyle of having health tanking or shield tanking. And if you're also not doing endurance very often, you probably will come to the same conclusion. As it is a much more passive playstyle, you don't have to worry about it as much. And when it comes to base steel path, they offer as good a survivability as shield tanking does. The only reason why shield tanking is really 100% necessary is when you're going into endurance, into the levels of enemies, into the well and true thousands, right? So it doesn't really matter too much on lower levels. That said, if you have a Warframe that is inherently very casty with their abilities, like say Korra with casting her Whip Claw just basically over, Whiplash, whatever it's called, basically over and over again, or any other Warframe in a similar boat, then I would recommend using a shield gain setup, because in that place, you're casting abilities a lot anyway, so you're getting all your shield gating without needing to think about it. Because every time you cast ability, you get your shields back, which gets you your survivability basically. So yeah, you need catalyzing shields, rolling guard, and for the base setup, but you obviously also need your actual shield regen, which can be done either by using Brief Respite is one way to do it. It converts 150% of the energy you use into shields. So say I use 30 energy, I will get 45 shields from using 30 energy, which would be almost enough to fully restore my shields with this setup. And then you can also use the Augur mods, which are just good mods to have in general, as Augur Message obviously can increase your duration, Reach can increase your range, very useful. Secrets is less useful because there are a lot of ways to increase strength, but still useful. But Augur Range and Augur Message find their way onto most builds anyway, and every single Augur mod you use increases your ability energy to conversion by 40%. So just these two, I would have 80% from the Augur mods plus the 150% I get from Brief Respite, which with these three mods alone, I'm getting enough shield recovery on a single ability cast of just 30 energy cost to fully restore my shields on Loki, right? And then you'll notice I'm actually getting a lot more shield regeneration from the Augur mods. This is because there are also two secondary Augur mods, Augur Seeker and Augur Pact, that you can put on literally any secondary weapon that you're not using as a primary DPS weapon. And even if you are using your secondary weapon as a primary DPS weapon, in which case you probably don't want to use those two mods in it because they're not that great for DPS, you have the Burst Laser Prime. You have the Burst Laser Prime, which has enough critical chance for Tenacious Bond, and is also the only secondary, along with the other two variants, the Prisma Burst Laser and also just the normal Burst Laser. Meaning you can put the two Augur mods on it, which gives you means you can get rid of the Augur mods on your secondary if you want to use that for a primary DPS weapon, and then you can put the two secondary Augur mods on your companion instead, which gives you a lot of shield to energy conversion and all the survivability you need. And like I said, if you're using a Warframe that is just generically spammy with its abilities anyway, then shield gating is going to be a no-brainer because it is the best survivability tactic in the game. And in that case, you don't really need to think about it. And the only downfall to shield gating is you have to be more actively paying attention to the game versus health tanking or shield tanking. So on those kind of Warframes, I do normally opt for shield gating because it's better, and I don't need to. It's still a relatively passive gameplay because I'm casting abilities anyway. But if I'm not in that situation, if I'm in a weapon platform that isn't casting abilities very often, I'm going to be using tank setups for base steel path at least because they're just a lot more passive. So yeah, every single setup when it comes to survivability has its positives, it has its defects. It has maybe there are always circumstances where you probably want to use one over the other. You can make generally any of them work in any circumstances if you really wanted to, except of course Anaris, Nidus, and Kulavo that can't use any of the shield ones because they don't have shields. But you can make them generally work in most circumstances, but sometimes one or the other will work better than the others, right? So you kind of just want to feel it which way is better and kind of go with it. Warframes with less shields will be better at health tanking and will also be better at health shield gating, but won't be as good as shield tanking. Health tanking might be better than shield tanking if you need the mod space. Shield tanking will be better than health tanking because it just gives generically better survivability. And obviously, health gating will be better overall than both. It's the best survivability, except it is more active and makes you have to pay more attention to the game. So if you don't enjoy that as much, you're going to enjoy the tanking setups a bit more. Besides this, obviously, you have other common survivability tactics like Overguard. If you're a Warframe that uses Overguard, you can basically use Overguard as shield gating because it has its own Overguard cape mechanic. And at base steel path levels, you can just tank with Overguard as well. No point in modding around that though, because Overguard doesn't get any. It isn't affected by damage reduction. It is affected by damage redirection. Some abilities do that, but no Warframe with damage redirection has Overguard natively, so you need to use something like Secondary Fortify. And then also invisibility. Invisibility is broken in this game. Invisibility offers you a ton of survivability. If you're playing any invisibility frame, the only mode you will ever need on an invisibility frame, like Loki, is Rolling Guard. And the reason why you want Rolling Guard is although you're invisible, you can still get hit with Eximus Flare attacks, for example, which will apply you with heat status effects, which can do a bit of damage to you. And Rolling Guard will give you that status cleansing, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. But yeah, if you're in invisibility frame, Rolling Guard, you're good. Revenant, he doesn't care. He has Mesmer Skin. Mesmer Skin is OP. Dante is also doesn't care because Dante's shield overguard regeneration makes him invincible. Gauss has amazing shield recovery, shield reduction delay rate. His 100% damage reduction to 6 of the 13 damage types. Like, yeah, there are tons of Warframes that have alternate survivability tactics that don't need to use these. And obviously, any Warframe with native damage reduction, so like say Gara, she has 90% damage reduction. There are tons that do. Shield tank and health tank setups will obviously be better on her because with Gara, using adaptation on Gara means you have a 99% damage reduction even before considering her armor, right? So you're going to get even more EHP from that. So yeah, these tactics work on every Warframe, generally speaking. Some will work better than others, depending on your circumstances. Some Warframes will work better specifically with other ones, like any tank setup will be better on damage reduction. Some Warframes can use alternate survivability tactics, whether it be Overguard, Invisibility, or something else like Mesmer Skin. But these three tactics are generally the survivability tactics that you can use on most builds that will give you enough survivability to last well into any generalized content. Any content that you will see in the normal gameplay that you're actually meant to see from a gameplay standpoint. So whether it be base steel path, EDA, even Necrocell, stuff like that, you can survive with this. EDA, you might start to struggle a tiny bit with health tank and shield tank setups, but you should still be able to survive it. You just might take a little bit more effort. The only case where it starts to matter a bit more is when you go into endurance and there is no actual gameplay reason to do that. It's very much just you do it because you're bored. So for any actual content that is meant to be in the game, this stuff works. It works well. It's all you need. And they're very simple. And you just need these few mods that you can get to an arcanes that are relatively easy to get, actually. And you can survive content relatively easy. Anyway, that is all for the video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, consider checking out some of my other videos. Maybe leave a like on this video. And subscribe. Leave a comment if you think I missed out anything. I'm more than happy to be corrected. I know I'm not perfect. I'm sure I may have said some incorrect information here or there. So if you call me out on anything I say incorrectly, because if you do, that means people watching the video will be able to see your comment and will get the correct information, which is what's important, right? So yeah, Also, just leave a comment with anything else you want to do. If you want to see me make a build for a specific Warframe or maybe even a specific weapon, I'm happy to take requests like that as well. And yeah, do please consider leaving me a subscribe. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, bye bye.